Hey, hi everyone. Welcome. I'm going to let everybody jump on. I know we'll have some trickle on here for about a minute or so, and then we'll get started. Hope everybody's having a fabulous week. And if anybody is having any problem hearing me, please let me know in the chat before we bring in our fabulous presenter. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Let's see. Yay, I think we can hear. Perfect. Hi, Yolanda. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get kicking because I know Kara has a slew of information for y'all and I don't want you to miss it. So first off, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you guys here in October for the Harmony webinar series. We were not able to have one last month, so I'm so happy to be back and to have everybody with us. Today we are presenting Perfectionism and Workaholism, the Impact on Mental Health by Kara Crosswhite-Brindle. Let me get my screen back up. I just lost it. There it is. I'm going to do a quick review. Most of you have heard this spiel. I don't want to bore you, and I know we got more exciting stuff coming. Harmony Foundation is nestled on a 43-acre campus in the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Estes Park. We are a residential rehab, and we offer comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. Who we are a long-term recovery treatment center for alcohol and other drugs. We do believe that recovery is possible. We are located at the base of the Rocky Mountain National Park. As I mentioned earlier, we have been treating addiction for over 50 years, and we have fostered a generation of long-term recovery. And we continue to support our clients and their families for a lifetime. So we are a 70-bed residential program. We do have an IOP program that we started within the last year and a half. If you need any more information about that, please feel free to reach out to our admissions staff. They'll be happy to give you all the details. You can also find more information about us on our website at harmonyfoundationinc.com. See. Couple of things I want y'all to remember is we will have an evaluation coming your way at the end of this. If you happen to miss that window, I will send out a link to the evaluation when I send out your certificates. These webinars are recorded. You will have access to them. I will have it up on the website by end of day on Friday. So at that point, it's no longer eligible for a CEU, but it will be accessible. So if you do not receive your certificate by Friday, October 29th, where the link will be as well, please give me a quick email and I will figure out what's going on and get you your certificate as soon as I can. We are going to kind of answer questions along the way. Is that correct, Kara? Is that what we decided? Yes. So yes. I'm gonna kind of watch the questions, the chat box. If you have any questions, put it in that chat box, and I'll kind of, when Kara takes a breath, I will jump in and give her that question so she can address it as quickly as possible. And aside from that, I just want to say thank you so much to Crosswhite Counseling for their continued partnership with them. We have been long-time friends for several years now, and we're so appreciative of them. If you have any questions or want more information on Kara and her in her facility, please go to crosswhitecounselingpllc.com. You will find the answers there. And now that I've brought up Kara about 5 times already, I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. She is passionate about giving people those aha moments that create goosebumps and catalyze powerful action. Kara is honored to serve young adult professionals in her work in mental health and higher education with an emphasis on healing perfectionist trauma and supporting personal growth. She is a licensed professional counselor, approved clinical supervisor, and owner of Crosswhite Counseling PLLC, a group private practice in Denver. Kara's greatest joy is engaging driven entrepreneurs and perfectionists to move from workaholic to well-balanced with streamlined strategies in her masterclass, workbook, and book series, Perfectioneur from Workaholic to Well Balanced, an Amazon #1 bestseller, which I will be acquiring very soon. So without holding this up any longer, I'm going to turn this whole presentation over to Kara and let her take over.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy, for the introduction. Let me get my PowerPoint up for us. See if I can get this to work. That's always the test, right?
Absolutely, always.
All right, how are we looking? Okay. All right, everybody. So hopefully you're here for this presentation on perfectionism and workaholism. I think they go pretty much hand in hand, which you'll see from today's content. Objectives, we're going to define perfectionism, what it looks like now compared to in the past, also defining workaholism. And as all of you are probably interested to know, what can we do with that information? So what does it look like to have strategies, things that can support the clients that we serve? Or if you, like me, relate to these terms, what you can do for yourself. So I am going to be monitoring the chat with Christy's help. If you have questions along the way, I do want you to use that. And there's a couple times where I'll ask for your participation if you're comfortable with the chat box. So let's jump in. So why me? So we learned a little bit about me from the introduction that Christy provided, but a couple more things to add context to why we're talking about these two topics of perfectionism and workaholism. Of course, I do identify as a former perfectionist, very much still identify as a type A driven professional. So having that as a lived experience, as well as serving a population of driven professionals and perfectionists, that is where I'm coming from with the context of today's work. I'm a serial entrepreneur. In addition to this business, this private practice, I also co-own a secondary business on clinical supervision called Supervisionary. Have written now 4 books and continue to teach at Metro and DU. So never bored, love to do lots of things. So I'm sure I've met some of you here on this call, and I'm happy to be back here partnering with Harmony. I am a licensed professional counselor, so everything I talk about today will be either data-driven or from the experience of working with these folks, and then would love to hear your thoughts on the clients that you're serving. And because I work with perfectionists, small business owners, and entrepreneurs, I'm continuing to kind of check and, I guess, test drive, for lack of a better word, different strategies. What's working for them? What do they need that's different from the general population? Because they do have different needs, as we're about to find out. And of course, that Amazon bestseller, very proud of that book, written in COVID, very much timely for everything we're about to talk about, because both perfectionism and workaholism are on the rise. Probably doesn't surprise most of you. So let's go. For all those of you comfortable with the chat box, I want you to tell me what you think perfectionism looks like right now. A question already from Christy, from David, from yesterday. Is there a link between perfectionism, workaholism, and the fear of abandonment? Man, if David's here today, I'd love to know if he's talking about fear of abandonment, personal or professional. We do see a link in worthiness. So for a lot of workaholics, their worth is wrapped up in their work, and perfectionism is a part of that. We want to do quality work. We want to be known for the work that we produce. So there is a link between the two, workaholism and perfectionism. Fear of abandonment might be a piece of the puzzle, but there is a lot more conversation around worth and the core beliefs around worth. So for folks who are here today, what do you think perfectionism looks like? What are you seeing in your clients, in the people in your life, in yourself? Kathy's saying control, absolutely. What else are you noticing for those of you who've worked with perfectionists, self-identified or otherwise? Self-critical from Joyce. Emails ongoing, lost in detail. Fear of making a mistake, almost manic. Yeah. Oh, hi, Meredith. Recognize you. Yeah, using it as a coping skill for trauma. The sense of control is definitely a part of that, right? So a lot of the folks that might have perfectionism could show up this way, where it comes to control, themes of not really taking a break, unbalanced is Heather's choice here, give everything to one area of their life, neglecting others. Yes. So you're starting to see why workaholism could be a byproduct of perfectionism, or that they go hand in hand. I don't want to let everyone down, must be the best, avoidance, moodiness. Yes, I love this group. You're very active. Yes, yes, keep going. So there's a lot of different factors, a lot of different features of perfectionism that we're trying to notice. I personally work with a lot of the graduate students, the medical students over here on the east side of Denver, And so we're seeing a lot of burnout because of this. We're seeing a lot of responsibility, maybe even over responsibility, codependence, a lot of black and white thinking, rigidity, superwoman syndrome. Yes, Alice Marie, absolutely. Call it the superhero cape. Can't take it off. So as you're thinking about these people or the features, I want to highlight just a couple that are coming up a little bit more frequently. So let's look at this. As some of you mentioned in the chat, expectations of self are pretty high, right? We can have someone that we're doing cognitive behavioral therapy with, for example, and they will give a lot more grace to others. They're more critical of themselves. In fact, they would say vicious, mean things to themselves that they would never utter to another person. Their expectations are that high. When you challenge this in a therapeutic sense and you say, well, would you do this to someone else? That's almost always a no, that they would never do that to somebody else. So expectations of self are perfection, high, can't make mistakes. If there is a mistake, very much black and white thinking. Maybe we have a mood spiral where we're just going low. That inner critic is super loud for folks that have perfectionism. Lindsay's saying, if I can be perfect, my family will be okay. So a lot of pressure and responsibility. If I'm perfect, oh, hey, David, there you are. If I'm perfect, I won't be abandoned. Yes. So a lot of expectations of self that would cause distress, mental stuff to show up, possibly workaholism, as we're about to look at. Interestingly enough, perfectionism has been on the rise since the 1980s. For those of you who are thinking about this, what was going on in the 1980s that would make this more possible? Why then? Why did we see a spike in perfectionism starting in the 1980s? Anyone have thoughts as to why that happened? Specifically, latchkey kids from Lindsay. Yes, that's a part of it. The independence. I can't even pronounce that, Ellen. Reaganomics. There we go. Race to space. So we've got some different like life events or environmental events that were happening. Self-help movement was absolutely showing up more. Women were in the workforce. Yes. So part of the 1980s to now was the expectation of everyone working, as you're all looking at in the chat box here. But also there was the expectation of comparison, right? We started talking about what everyone was doing. As you fast forward into the 90s, 2000s to now, we see this more with social media comparison. That black and white thinking shows up now, like constantly, frequently. So there is data that's been collected by Dr. Jean Twenge, who is the person who's been collecting data since the 1980s to see that uptick in perfectionism. Was doing surveys, people were self-reporting, hey, this is what's going on for me. And it really started to climb from the 1980s to now for all the things that you've listed here in the chat box. Enneagram is another thing to consider for perfectionism. If you're a fan of the Enneagram like I am, this is a personality test. It's another one that we're using more often now than ever. It's a way of how we connect with people, how we relate to people. So unlike the Myers-Briggs or the Big Five, Enneagram is looking at how we show up healthy versus unhealthy. So looking at in our most healthy, what are those traits? And our most unhealthy, what shows up? So as you can imagine, perfectionism in its most unhealthy has that rigidity, has the black and white thinking, has the lack of boundaries. So our Enneagram types most likely to subscribe to perfectionism would be your Enneagram type 1s and your Enneagram type 3s. The Enneagram 1s are called perfectionists. The Enneagram type 3s are called performers or achievers. So as we look at all of this, it starts to overlap a little bit. Of the generations that we're tracking right now, the millennial and Gen Z generations, so millennial being roughly 1980 to 1996, sorry, 1980 to 1996, and 1996 to 2004 for Gen Z. It fluctuates a little bit. Sometimes you'll see 1984 instead of 1980. But these two generations in general have higher perfectionism. They're reporting this in surveys. They're showing up to our mental health offices with this. And part of that, again, is the social media element. Here are two generations that had a lot of pressure to perform. Think about the participation trophies for the millennial generation. Think about how it emphasized academics for folks. Think about those medical students that are like, I have to get into med school. I have to get into an Ivy League school. I have to do my best. This is showing up everywhere. And social media is how we're comparing. How am I landing compared to others? So this probably isn't surprising a lot of you who are working with this young adult to adult population. that is coming in talking about this more frequently. The one thing that might surprise you was a study that was done in 2019 that came out from the Attorney General here in Colorado on teen suicide. What's the connection? Why is that connected to perfectionism? Well, they surveyed about 1,300 students in the rural communities, so looking at Pueblo, some of the Delta County, and so on. They said, tell us what's contributing to your suicidal thought. You're struggling, it's a rural community, you don't have the same access to resources. What's going on? And they said there were 3 things that showed up continuously for this population: pressure, perfectionism, and lack of social connection. Those 3 things were most likely to contribute to a teenager saying, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm having suicidal thought. So, as you can imagine, this has become more on our radar than ever because it's not only leading to workaholism, which we will also define, it's also contributing to mental health crisis, including suicidal thought. It's not a cause and effect relationship, but we are seeing that pressure continuing to show up as, am I perfect? Am I doing things right? Am I getting into the right schools? Am I getting good grades? Do I have the right people? Do I fit in or belong? This is why that Colorado study of suicidal teens is connected. Questions so far on perfectionism?
Looks good, Kara.
Okay, double checking. So in contrast, or maybe alongside perfectionism, go ahead and put into the chat box what you think workaholism looks like. Some of it's pretty darn similar. What are we thinking about? How do we measure this? As you're thinking about defining it, notice how it shifted from being a thing of pride, being like, hi, I'm a workaholic, smiley face, to now being like, ooh, workaholism is a problem. Anna, absolutely. Defining yourself by your output at work, how much you produce, never turning off, cannot stop working, can't do nothing, can't leave until it's done, no proper boundaries. Yes, work is more important than anything else. Definitely feels that way to our family members. Productivity is success, doing it all. Absolutely. Some of those expectations, to Cindy's point, are from work. Some are our own expectations, especially from a perfectionist. Feeling like you can't say no, addiction to work. Absolutely. You're all on that right track. So, one of the things that came out last year in 2020 that I find very valuable to this conversation is Celeste Headley's book called Do Nothing. In this book, she talks about burnout, which of course is a hot topic right now, but she also talks about how busyness and workaholism came to be. She looks at it from the Industrial Revolution to now and says, this is how this became a problem. It's a fascinating book. It's got a lot of research behind it. It really does get the wheels turning as to why we have a problem with workaholism now. As most of you can imagine, in COVID, we've seen an uptick in workaholism. There's less work-life separation, to what many of you put in the chat box. We are more productive than ever. In fact, some of us backslid into workaholism as a way of feeling a sense of control or security when everything else felt uncertain in this pandemic. So Celeste Headley's book started that conversation for folks by saying, here it started in the Industrial Revolution. So think about that for a second. Why is that a significant time period? Well, in the Industrial Revolution, this was the time that we actually were able to go from factory or shift work to actually working into the evening because of electricity or candles or any of the things that were created to allow us to work past when it got dark. Now we weren't dictated to work only when there was sunlight, like in agriculture, for example. Now we could work late into the hours of the evening or overnight if we wanted to. So that Industrial Revolution kickstarted an expectation that we didn't have to stop with the sun. Now we could work whenever we wanted. In fact, some of the employers at the time expected us to work 12, 16-hour days. This started in the Industrial Revolution. Where would smartphones come into workaholism? What are your thoughts on this? Where am I headed with it? Any guesses? Easy access to work, absolutely. Electronic leash, ooh, what an image. Access to emails, we're always connected. You are all correct, yes. Social comparison, also with the social media smartphone component. Smartphones, we have at all times. Most of us, if you do an experiment of putting your phone away or accidentally leaving it at home, it causes physical discomfort and distress. Our anxiety goes through the roof. We want to compulsively check it. In this pandemic, we've seen people use their phones more as that security blanket. What's it like to just doom scroll and just like mindlessly escape into something? What's it like to have our mood change because we're comparing through social media? So smartphones have made it where email is accessible, work is accessible at the click of a button, for better or worse. In this case, worse. How many minutes do you think people expect us to take to respond to an email? A long time, well, not a long time ago, but several months ago, there was a distinction between the response time on a text message being different than an email. Now they're the same. So when you think about this, if you get an email at 9 o'clock at night, there's an expectation potentially from that sender that you're still going to respond to it with the same ease or fastness as a text message. So how many minutes are we given? Take a guess in the chat box for me. How many minutes are we given to respond to an email now in the American culture? 30 to 60 minutes. I would love that to be true, Lindsay. 10, 3, 3. Any other guesses? 1 minute. Whew, well, that's definitely an overachiever. Marvin, you're super close. Alice Marie, you're also super close. 6 minutes. 6 minutes is now the expectation for emails and text messages. Isn't that wild? Text messages used to be the fastest way to communicate because we had the expectation that they'd respond. But now we put the same bar on emails. We've set the bar high. In 6 minutes or less, you're going to respond to it. So as you can imagine, for people who are working odd hours, working into the evening, this becomes a challenge. Now we don't get that work-life separation. Now we're in the middle of watching a movie with our family and we hear a ping or a pop-up and we're back in the work mode, just like that, because that 6 minutes is an expectation. How does that make all of you feel? Some of you are like, yep, living it, totally doing it. Some of you are like, I want to respond as quickly as possible and clear out my inbox. I hate seeing those red numbers of here's how many are sitting there. So some of the strategies might be to take off the notifications, to lock down the email, to go into do not disturb mode. For this reason, we have people trying these strategies because work is popping up at inconvenient times. We're answering the phone on the toilet. We're answering the phone in the middle of intimacy. We're answering emails at all hours of the day, waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and checking our phone. So that is a part of why workaholism is on the rise. There is also this hustle mentality, which as a reformed perfectionist and working on my own workaholism, the hustle or grind thing makes me want to cringe. It makes my teeth clamp down. But there's this glorifying of hustle or grind culture. Have you noticed? Especially for our 20 and 30 somethings. This is what we're supposed to do. This is how we build our career. This is the expectation of the American culture. So if we have a hustle mentality, we are now celebrating that people don't take breaks. We're now celebrating that they haven't taken a vacation in 8 years. We're glorifying the fact that they're skipping lunch, working into the wee hours of the morning. Maybe now we're celebrating that they're an entrepreneur, which means they're working at all sorts of odd hours around their full-time job. So that hustle mentality has been glorified, which is also contributing to workaholism here and now. And as I mentioned, the COVID impact on work-life balance is another factor. Working from home, we're actually working more hours than ever. We don't have that ritual of commuting home to give us a break, to actually help us decompress, to help us actually move into home mode. We're doing everything from home. So we're working more now than ever. This is part of the challenge. Thoughts or questions on workaholism and what you're noticing? Joyce says, sounds about right for the 6 minutes. So who embodies these traits? Who most often are we going to work with or have come into our practices, our treatment facilities, our outpatient care? Who are we going to be looking at to have these traits? Well, busyness is a problem for everyone. So let me start there. But when it comes to perfectionism and workaholism, that combination, there are kind of a couple different groups of people that I want you to be aware of beyond the Enneagram 1 and 3 category. So you might recognize some of these faces. Far left, Tony Stark, Marvel movie, right? Iron Man. definitely embodies the workaholism, right? I mean, he puts himself into a physical health crisis because he won't stop working on his projects. He's an innovator. Alice Marie could be a firstborn that has this going on, that pressure to like set the bar high for the rest of the siblings. But for a lot of the same folks, the same words of driven, innovator, leader might show up. And so that's where we blur the lines between, is this a problem or are we glorifying it? Tony Stark's character, if you watch the Marvel movies, goes from pretty poor boundaries to eventually like developing relationships and settling a little bit more into his character. At first, you kind of either love him or hate him, and then he becomes more human. In the middle, you see Steve Jobs, actually known to be a perfectionist, was reported by people who worked for him that he was a perfectionist. Over the years, he was able to work on that rigidity a little bit, so it was easier to work for him because when it was that black and white thinking, it was hard to meet his expectations as an employee. So Steve Jobs is someone that a lot of people have admired for his innovation, for the things he's done for Apple. And yet he also had his challenges, which included that perfectionism piece. The far right side is supposed to represent a gunner. So if you've heard that term for the medical community, the medical students, if you will, a gunner is a person who's kind of cutthroat, who's like, I will do anything to perform. I'll do anything to get the best job, opportunity, grades. This person is usually not very well liked by their peers because of that competitiveness and that cutthroat quality. And yet they also embody workaholism and perfectionist traits. It's kind of what we're seeing in that population who gravitates towards medicine because it's very competitive. Compulsive personalities absolutely would be a piece here. Recovering addicts, yes, Alice Marie, yeah. Addiction would go right in there with workaholism, being addicted to work, especially if we can't turn off our brains or we're always thinking about work. There is no separation. Now, workaholism is something that I think is continuing to be defined. And I wish I'd read this book back when I was really in the depths of workaholism. It's called Chained to the Desk. It's all about workaholics, their families, and what their clinicians can do for them. I think Brian is his name. We'll look at him in a minute here. But that is a book that I wish I'd had like 8 years ago when I was in the midst of my own workaholism, because it's like being seen, having it defined, being like, oh, that's me. So the gunners or the medical students might fit this category. Again, these are generalizations. These are not everyone, but it is something we're seeing as certain personalities gravitate towards certain industries. Entrepreneurship, innovation, medicine. You might see these folks in those industries for that reason. Questions or thoughts here? David's asking, how comfortable are workaholics asking for help in anything? I guess it depends on what they're asking for help on. When it comes to performance, there might be some pride there. There might be some vulnerability that a lot of workaholics hate. But if they're working on themselves, they might be more willing to embrace that. If it comes to job performance, they might ask for help just knowing that it's going to help the job get done. That might be an easier ask for them versus something more heartfelt or emotional, in my experience. Perfectionism, workaholism is so reinforced, it's hard to stop. Yes, Lindsay, or recognize. Again, American culture glorifies these things. It wasn't really considered a problem until the burnout conversation of COVID. Now we're talking about it. That's why you're all here. All right, let's go to workaholism a little bit more. So Dr. Brian Robinson, that's the person's name. Okay, so Chained to the Desk is the book we're talking about. He defines 4 types of workaholics. Again, wish I'd had this information 8 years ago, because even though these are categorizations that might not fit everyone, I think there is something to be discovered here. So he calls them relentless workaholics. This is the traditional type of workaholism you're all thinking about, the Tony Starks of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world, the folks who are push, 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 next thing, steamroll and goal. I call them the churners. They're producing a lot. They're known for like output, productivity. They get stuff done. And so that's celebrated, right? When it comes to productivity and things in the workplace, it's no wonder that this type of workaholic is the easiest to recognize. The second type is attention deficit workaholics. That's Dr. Robinson's words. In my case, the dreamers. These are the innovators, maybe the people who have like the big ideas, but then they recruit other people to implement those ideas. So they might be the person at the top being like, here's the vision, here's the mission, but in the end, they're the dreamer in the sense that they have all the ideas and someone else has to implement them for them. So maybe you relate to that definition here quite broadly. The third type of workaholic, according to Dr. Robinson, is the bulimic workaholic. I call them the sprinters. They have starts and stops. They might have a chance for innovation, brilliant idea at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is common, and then have moments of being lethargic, unproductive, or procrastination. So some folks have these start-stop motions where it's like they're really productive in certain seasons, beginning of the month, maybe at the end of the month are kind of dragging. Maybe they have depression, or maybe they're in that manic state for productivity followed by a depression episode. So sprinters kind of start, stop, they go fast, and then they kind of take a break. Last but not least are your savoring workaholics, or your plotters, is what I call them lovingly. Your plotters are folks that are going to take their time, who once they start a project aren't really eager to finish it very quickly. They're not going to rush. So they're not going to be like the churners or the sprinters. They're going to take their time. And in fact, their perfectionism shows up in nitpicking things. It's not perfect yet, so I'm not done. So if you have a person in your life or a client in your life that you've been working with who finds themselves at roadblocks or procrastination or gets really nitpicky and can't finish something, this might be something to look at for them. Do they resonate with a savoring workaholic or plotter label? So maybe this is getting you thinking about how would you relate to these 4 different types? How would they be different in a client that shows up in your care? And so one of the things I'm going to put here in the chat box is just a fun little quiz I put together on the types of workaholics to see how this might land for you. It's just meant to get the juices flowing. It's not a diagnostic tool by any means, but to say, here's a churner, a dreamer, a sprinter, and a plotter. Which type are you most likely to subscribe to? And how does that show up based on how you answer those questions? So obviously, it's just got a few questions there. Don't have to do this right now, but for those of you who are listening in and thinking about this, talk to me for a second. Put in the chat box what kind of workaholic you see most often or one you relate to the most, if you're comfortable. Thank you, Natalie. Churner. Yeah, I think there's probably the highest percentage of folks in the churner category, just based on the fact that it's the most easy to recognize. Dreamer sprinter combo. Interesting. Okay. Sprinter. Just kind of looking at your strengths, your challenges, little mix of sprinter and churner. Yes. Yeah. Like those moments of like high productivity, taking a break. Absolutely. So for a lot of you, you're starting to think about this now, not just from the label of workaholic, the big umbrella, but now you're thinking about the characteristics of each of these types of workaholics, which again, a lot of us didn't know until recently because this conversation is now being had. So the big question for this group is, what's the mental health impact? As you think about the people you serve or the people you love or yourself, feel free to put in the chat box, what's the implications? What's the effect of being a perfectionist and workaholic? What does this do to you, your relationships, the people that you serve? Burnout's a big one, Lindsay. Yes, very much so. Anxiety from Joyce. High anxiety, Leslie. You're seeing lots of burnout. Relatable, is it not? Never relax. Depression. Stuck in fear. One-dimensional life. Ooh, that one hits home. Feeling of never getting ahead. Exhaustion. Yes. There's a whole checklist of things we could look at from the burnout lens, but also that mental health lens of here's what they come in saying they're experiencing. Here's the somatic complaint. Here's the disruption to their life. Whether it's my relationships are in shambles or I physically feel ill, these are things that you might be tracking as a mental health provider. Sarah, never enough, overreactive, OCD. Some really interesting things that are popping out. Being sensitive to criticism, high irritability, maybe. Emotion regulation is different. Sleep disruption. There's a whole laundry list. So obviously I want to give you kind of the big ones, knowing that there's a lot more to be captured than just the ones here about to be on my screen. So I love that you're thinking about what actually applies to the people you serve or to yourself. What are the typical cognitions of someone experiencing perfectionism and workaholism? Well, we've identified that there's a huge inner critic. They're usually pretty loud. They're pretty negative. The cognitions are that black and white thinking, the all or nothing. It's either this or this. There's no in between. There's no gray area. So as you listen or tune into a client's disclosures in a session, for example, you're going to be listening for this language. If it's a med student saying, I didn't get into school, so I might as well just give up, there's some rigidity. There's some black and white thinking. There's some gentle challenging that we might need to contribute to help them through that as a mental health provider. For some folks, this is actually what leads to suicidal thought. If I can't have this, I might as well give up or stop or die, whatever that looks like. So it can get pretty dark pretty quickly when we're tracking this from the mental health lens. How can I keep up this pace? They all look to me. So again, that pressure, right? Some mental health impact, the cognitions of people are counting on me. Business is counting on me. Maybe it's a sense of over responsibility and or loyalty to a company that may be hurting them or not respecting their boundaries. I know that's frustrating for a lot of us. A lot of clients, I can't accept praise, never feeling good enough. Absolutely. And from Jack, God complex. Have to be perfect, have to rescue, have to do it all. So it's pretty easy to recognize the cognitions if someone is vocalizing this aspect of perfectionism and burnout and workaholism. There's also a distinction for a lot of us who serve this population between self-care and self-medicating. What do I mean by that? Well, self-care is commercialized. For any of you who know me personally, you know that the word self-care has been a mixed bag for me as one of those perfectionist workaholics at one point. When we think of self-care, we hope that it's balanced. We hope that it's restorative. We hope that it's restful. We hope that we're able to access that. Now, these type A driven folks struggle with self-care. The whole concept of it is foreign for them. And if nothing else, it's not justifiable with time or money. So you think of those small business owners, those hustlers, those entrepreneurs, they don't make time for self-care. The triple A type instead of just an A type. Yes. Insomnia might be a part. Absolutely, Jack. So the difference between self-care and self-medicating is self-medicating might be, okay, now I'm embracing certain things that just take the edge off. So what might be some examples of that you're seeing with your clients? I know a lot of you are in the addiction field. What are they addicted to right now? What are you tracking? Alcohol. Saw a huge uptick in alcohol use in COVID. Food, yes. Netflix, absolutely. Escapism is kind of the theme there. Anything that something won out. Chills went out, I think is what you meant there. Vapes, doles went out. Thank you, Jack. So self-medicating is like taking the edge off, but it's a short-term fix, right? It's putting a Band-Aid on the bullet hole, if you will. It's addressing the symptoms, but not the problem. So the mental health impact of perfectionism and workaholism is that maybe we lean towards self-medicating because that's all we have the capacity to do. We're struggling with our own inner critic. We have all these things that we feel responsible for. Maybe we're just trying to take the edge off, which is why we see a connection to substances, which is why we see some negative habits show up, especially in the time of COVID. Absolutely. It could be computer games, sex, video games, all sorts of things. So kind of picking the poison, if you will. When it came to this pandemic, I don't know about you guys, but I was also trying to be very thoughtful of maybe self-medicating felt more accessible than self-care. We were told to stay home. We were told not to go away, do anything, travel, which is sometimes the self-care of folks like this. They work hard, play hard. They want to work for a chunk and then take some time off. And that was all locked down for a little while. So self-care had to be redefined in this last year and a half. But in the meantime, we might have seen an uptick in self-medicating. So that has another impact from the mental health lens. Addiction to recovery. That's an interesting one, Jack. Yeah, or like addiction to self-help, maybe. They're consuming books, looking for answers. That could show up too. There's an immense risk for burnout. If 75% of the working population has experienced burnout just this year, in the sense of by this point in their career, they've experienced burnout, it's not surprising, right? If 75% of the population of workers are telling us they've experienced burnout somewhere in their career, it doesn't surprise me that workaholism and perfectionism contributes. So burnout has 40 plus symptoms, right? Everything from irritability to sleep disruption, to weight gain or loss, to stomach stuff, to cracked teeth. For folks that have heard me in other presentations, you know that last year we saw more cracked teeth in 2020 than the 6 years prior. Just 1 year. Tension headaches, sit in front of our computers, grinding our teeth at night. Cracked teeth was the result. My personal favorite, for whatever reason, when it comes to burnout, is an increase in road rage. These symptoms are coming from the Vital Hearts training here in Colorado that's helping people recover from burnout, saying this is a list of things you may relate to. So the risks of burnout are pretty high. If we're struggling to not work, if we're struggling with perfectionism, it makes sense that it's a connection, that there is a correlation between that and burnout. Sleep disruption was a huge one. I think it's always been significant, but we're seeing that more now as we adjust to other stressors in this pandemic. But sleep disruption could be everything from I have a brilliant idea at 4 o'clock in the morning and have to get up and do something with it, which might be more the workaholic side, versus sleep disruption of anxiety from perfectionism. I messed something up. I said something stupid. I'm not prepared for my presentation in the morning. Whatever shows up in that inner critic space might actually contribute to sleep disruption. Perhaps you noticed last year that a lot of people were waking up for no reason at 1 or 2 in the morning. Did that happen to any of you? I had clients who were just like, I was wide awake, no reason for it, no particular thought, just woke up. So we know that sleep disruption is a thing in general, but it's also contributing to mental health. It's so important that we get sleep. You all know this, and it's not happening in the way we'd like. Patient client feeling justified in using marijuana because it's legalized. That's part of that self-medicating. So much going on there. An increase in rumination and anxiety is absolutely a connection for workaholism and perfection. As we talk about, it's showing up. It's there. It was always there. It's just now dialing up a little bit louder, especially if they feel like they've made a mistake or aren't doing enough. They're not busy enough. They're not productive enough. They're not enough as people. That's what I mentioned earlier with not just the fear of abandonment that was asked by David, but also what does it look like to say, this is my worth. My worth is wrapped up in what I do. If I'm not producing, creating something of value, am I now feeling worthless, feeling anxious, feel like I'm ruminating? So these are some of the kind of bigger buckets under that mental health impact that we're seeing for the folks that say, I'm suffering from workaholism, or I'm suffering from perfectionism, or I'm suffering from both. What else have you seen with the population you're serving? Are there questions that are coming up? Perfectionism and workaholism do not discriminate. We see different ages, we see different backgrounds, especially if they're subscribing to our American culture. Doesn't matter who you are, this is kind of an expectation. This is how we do things, which is a bigger challenge to address at some point. There's a question popping in here. Let's take a look. Okay, never mind, we got it.
You got it?
Yep. The treadmill of life. Yes. Like never stopping, never taking a break. In fact, one of my clients this week just said, I feel guilty when sitting on the couch doing nothing. How many of your clients can relate to that? This immediate guilt that shows up when we're not being productive or we're not doing something, the false sense of busyness, which potentially leads us to feeling like we're productive. That is a complete connection to our entrepreneurs. Their risks are, okay, I have this desire to make something of myself, to have the freedom to be my own boss, whatever that looks like around their values. And now they're working way too much, 24/7, working around their full-time job, taking time away from their families, taking time away from self-care. The entrepreneur risks are pretty high. In fact, just in general, mental health for entrepreneurs is 46%. I think it's 46%. I'll have to grab the study for all of you. 46% of entrepreneurs have a mental health condition. Maybe that's ADHD, maybe that's bipolar, maybe that's anxiety, whatever it is, they already have a set number of risks. It's kind of the chicken and egg question, which came first, their entrepreneurial spirit or the mental health. But when it comes to workaholism and perfectionism, entrepreneurs absolutely subscribe to both because this is what they're told is going to get them to a place of success, whether that's true or not. Feeling dismissed or disrespected by administration, maybe not feeling heard or understood, COVID times, measuring against old standards, kids feeling behind. Everyone is behind. Yes, Heather.
Karen, did you see Terry's question?
I did not. Did I miss it?
Okay, Terry has a quick question for you. It says, does a relationship exist between perfectionism and obsessive compulsive disorder?
Ooh, I could see that being a connection. I do not specialize in OCD, so I can't speak to that completely confidently. But I can definitely see where the rumination, or I guess the obsession part of it would come in, not necessarily the compulsion part. There is a flavor of compulsion to workaholism because of that feeling of laziness or lack of productivity. But yeah, I mean, I would say there's probably a loose connection, if not a more confirmed one by an OCD specialist, which I am not. But yes, I could see there being a flavor. Absolutely. Other questions, Christy? Or is that the only one I missed?
That's the only one I see right now.
Okay. So let's talk strategies here. Most of you are like, yep, got it. We totally know that this is the thing. Workaholism, perfectionism, burnout are all present here and now in what's happening in our world. What works for these folks? If we talked about they have a hard time with self-care, I can assure you that it has to look differently for them to actually do it and do it well. So let's talk strategy. First thing, for those of you who subscribe to cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or any of those, ACT, all the acronyms, right? Cognitive reframes are helpful. Now, the one thing to know about cognitive reframes for folks that identify with perfectionism and workaholism is that they're not about the hearts and flowers. They don't want to go from, I'm a piece of crap if I don't be productive, to I'm a wonderful person. That's a big swing for them. So if you were to engage a person in cognitive reframes, try and be as realistic as possible. Utilize the language that you're hearing them use. Have them craft a cognitive reframe that feels doable. So instead of I'm a piece of crap to I am wonderful, it might be I'm doing the best I can. That might feel authentic to this person because it's not hearts and flowers. It's neutral, if not the best they can do in this moment. Does this make sense to everyone? So we're not going to sell them a bunch of like personal, what is that list called? Personal bill of rights, where it's like, I'm wonderful, I'm loved. These folks can't take that in. They actually will quickly reject that, much to the compliments piece that was here in the chat box. Can't take praise very well. So cognitive reframes need to be realistic and succinct, realistic and short. Have it be in their words. Have them craft something that isn't, I love myself, because that's probably not going to show up in the first go. 5 to 10 minutes of commitment. This one was something I had to learn for myself and the driven professionals I serve. If we ask someone to take a 7-day vacation, they're going to say no. If it's not the financial strain, it's the productivity strain that puts on them. It's the 500 emails they have when they get back. It's the I'm in the middle of a project. This is not the right time. So instead, I want us to embrace the concept of 5 to 10 minutes of something. Maybe it's 5 to 10 minutes of walking. Maybe it's 5 to 10 minutes of listening to music or whatever else they enjoy. What we notice is there's a lot less resistance to this strategy by just putting a smaller time frame on it. What does self-care look like in 5 to 10 minutes? What else could they do in those 5 to 10 minutes? Lo and behold, when I say this, I get a lot less pushback because it's like, oh, I can do anything for 5 minutes. Maybe it's I'm drinking water or taking a phone call or talking to their spouse, whatever that looks like. But 5 to 10 minutes seems to be the sweet spot for these folks that I work with, that I think you're seeing as well, where it feels like it's doable. It's not too big of an ask. A lot of my clients love the 10-minute rule. Yeah, thank you, Brooke. That's very affirming. Like, I don't think it's just my people. I think it's everyone, especially in this culture of busyness, right? So think about something they can do in 5 to 10 minutes. What would that mindfulness look like? What would a meditation look like? What would walking or moving or drinking water look like in a 5 to 10 minute commitment? One of my clients actually loved the idea of listening to her favorite song because it was about a 3 to 5 minute song. And that for her was the mental break from work, where she got up and moved around, danced around her office, and then sat back down. And that for her worked. So working with your clients to be creative and embrace the idea of 5 to 10 minutes, much more doable for them. Self-awareness. What is it works for workaholics and perfectionists is they want to learn about themselves. It's those Enneagram 1 and 3s yet again. They want to know what's working, where their weaknesses lie, what they can do to improve, right? I mean, the running joke is with the perfectionists, if you give them homework, they always do it because they're perfectionists. So self-awareness is something they embrace. They like the idea of that lens, come at it from that or psychoeducation, and they're all about it. They're not necessarily about the woo-woo or, for lack of a better word, like the fluffy stuff. They want things that are built into data, that have education or research behind them, and that can contribute to their self-awareness, those aha moments that they might be looking for to level up, to get better, to feel balanced. So self-awareness is kind of a piece or a buzzword that works for folks that are working through workaholism and perfectionism. Neuroscience is something they love. If you're like me and kind of a big nerd, you might be like, oh my gosh, there's a study and this is what they found and this is what it is. And for whatever reason, those of us who identify this way just love that stuff. We want to know it is backed by something, that it's not just word of mouth or the fad of the day. Like, we want to know that there's something behind it. So if you do like research or studies or books like Irresistible or Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, or anything that's got Adam Grant writing about his research, those things might be a good fit for folks that have workaholism and perfectionism that they're being challenged by. So those are just some things I've learned over the years working with this population that may work for the clients that you're serving. What else have you seen work for the people that you serve? Feel free to put some in the chat box. Some of you are like, I don't know. All right, well, there's two strategies I want to leave you with today. I'm going to make sure you have these Dropbox links here shortly. But the first exercise is having your perfectionist and workaholic learn to say yes to no. So what I mean by that, say no more. No more on their plate, no more often. So the exercise itself that you'll see here in the chat box here shortly is, what are they commonly asked to do? What are they asked by their employer, their family, by colleagues? What's distracting them or keeping them in that busy cycle when really they need to take that break? What's keeping them in a workaholic cycle when really they need to do some self-care? So maybe it's having someone show up in their inbox saying, I need a favor. I need to pick your brain. I need you to help me with this deadline. So having these people who are workaholics and perfectionists say no is really hard. Yes, no is a complete sentence, but for many of us, it's hard to do. So this exercise is all about crafting your no. What does it like to say no, thank you? Not right now. Check in next week. Talk to me next month. Talk to you in the new year. And so that exercise is something that can be very concrete for these folks. Treat yourself like you treat a friend. Absolutely, Jack. Yeah, that is definitely a strategy. And hopefully it feels more gentle because we're not very nice to ourselves. So this is one exercise I'm going to make sure you grab in the Dropbox here just shortly. I just don't want to minimize the screen just yet. But could be a very concrete exercise for your workaholics and perfectionists. So here's just a little quick infographic, some of the things that we're hearing in our community, our industry of mental health. Can I pick your brain? What's your availability? People asking for our time, our energy, and what would it look like to craft an authentic response of no, thank you, or check back with me later. So by having these crafted ahead of time, people are more likely to feel confident in their delivery. What is it like to say no when we are working against workaholism? What is it just like to say, check in with me later when we don't want to miss an opportunity as a perfectionist? So this is a big challenge for folks. Exercise 2 is watch your warning signs. So we've talked about, and this is another link in a worksheet for you here soon. We've talked about all the different warning signs, dozens of symptoms, dozens of things that people might come to you saying, I'm experiencing sleep stuff, stomach stuff, relational stuff. I'm not happy. I'm depressed. I'm gaining weight. My hair's falling out. Whatever is showing up. Just, are they aware of those warning signs? Do they realize they're connected? For me, in my own burnout recovery as a mental health professional, I did not know road rage was a thing for burnout until I went and did that training. So if we're working on ourselves and we have all these perfectionists and workaholics coming around saying, I also feel this, I also relate to this, what can I do with it? The second part of the worksheet is having them craft activities that are self-care based. What can they do for those 5 to 10 minutes? What can they do by themselves? So solo activities like reading a book, journaling, walking, cooking, versus with somebody they care about. What's it like to spend time with their spouse, their children, their partner, their best friend? And all of a sudden having this visual of here's what I can do for myself for 5 to 10 minutes, and here's what I can do with someone else, makes that more possible that they'll follow through. Because now it's not just talking about it, it's visibly in front of them saying, what can I pick off my list to do when I'm not feeling very good or when I'm in workaholic or perfectionist cycles? Kathy saying permission to walk away, say no. Yes. So that is something that we're all working on, I think more now than ever. So this is just a visual example of what those warning signs can show up like when it comes to the worksheet. So maybe alone, they're saying I could do reading, I could journal, I could be creating something. Maybe actively I'm doing something by myself or with somebody else. So this is kind of the quadrants that I put together in the worksheet for someone to say, what would this look like for me? What would be my custom self-care that's satisfying, that's short, that fits 5 to 10 minutes and still makes them feel better? Because that's what this is all about. So recognizing that we're getting to the end of our time here, I want you to know that there is an option here to grab all of the worksheets, all of the exercises that are in my book that are available in a digital form for you to use with clients if you think that's appropriate. So that's found here at perfectioner.com. And then I want to open up to other questions here with our last little chunk with Christy's help.
Yes, let's see what we've got. You guys feel free to type away. I'm going to go over a few things and kind of use these couple of minutes just to remind you that this is recorded and it will be available on our website. Please, please, please fill out the evaluation form that comes. We are always looking at those, trying to find speakers that will absolutely cover the topics that y'all have requested. So hang on there. And then if it's okay with Kara, I will include these links that she's putting in your chat box. I will also include them in your email when I send out your certificate with the link to the website. So there'll be a whole bunch of information in there for you. So we will do that. I also want to remind you, our next webinar is on November 17th. It is with Andrea Pittman, and the title is Putting ADHD into Focus. So if you want to join me for that, please look for the registration information. It should be out within the next probably 4 days or so. Do we see any questions?
Nope, everyone's just saying thank you. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yay.
I hope this is helpful. I know it's a work in progress for so many of us.
Oh gosh, this was a great webinar, Kara. I know it touched home for a lot of us, and especially those who see this in their practice. And we're so grateful you're here. And for everybody who took the time out of their day to join us, we are so grateful for you supporting the Harmony webinar series every month. So again, fill out those evaluations and have an absolutely fabulous week. We'll see you next month.